Hi, I'm Tom, a developer at CloudCannon. I wanted to make a guide today on how to manage multilingual content inside of CloudCannon CMS. At a high level, there's two sort of main approaches. The first one is to generate multilingual pages from a set of original HTML files and a set of data files containing translations. And we would generate the different languages in a post-build step in CloudCannon. The other one is to make just a direct copy of your original contents files, but build them at a different subdirectory than the originals, which would build them at a different URL, and those pages would be edited like any other content collection in CloudCannon. So today we'll start with the second approach, and we'll dive right in. So we'll start with one of our templates. So we'll just worry about taking an existing CloudCannon site and making that multilingual. We'll use the send it template. It can be found on our templates page, and I'm going to go with Astro today. I'll just view that on GitHub. I'll make my own copy. Cool, so I'll pull that down onto my local. I'll also create a site from that repository on CloudCannon, and I'll find my repo and then make a site from that using the main branch. While that builds, I'll go check the local copy of the repo that I just pulled down, and I'll open that up in VS Code. Okay, so I now have a site on CloudCannon, which is also on the internet under this placeholder URL that CloudCannon gives us, and we also have this locally. I guess I'll get ready for local development by running an npm install, and I'll start the dev server, and we can see our site locally. From here, I am going to add a language picker, which will help us test our multilingual content. This could be slightly outside of the scope of how you manage multilingual content inside of CloudCannon, but I think it's pretty essential to help us test. So I'm going to go ahead and add that first. We come to our local code. I'm going to go to navigation.jsx. So navigation.jsx is our header that we see at the top of the page. And I got the robot to write me up a language picker before this, for Astro in particular. I won't go into what is happening in here. I'll just copy and paste it, and then if you're curious, this repo will be available in the description for this video. Okay, so we have a language picker file. We have a custom hook here. We've abstracted it out to. Now we just need to add the actual HTML for that language picker. So if I run npm start once we've made those changes, we can see, yep, changes pages, but there's no page there to go to yet. So that's great. Stop the development server. I might actually get rid of these console logs that the AI left in. Comment those out. Cool, so we've added a lang picker. First, we're going to look at a method of translating text-heavy sections of your site. Something like a doc section or a blog section would benefit from this style of managing your multilingual content. So let's just dive right in. I'll just make a copy of this. I'll call it FR blog. I'm going to use French today. So we need a new collection. We'll go into our config.ts, which is Astro's way of configuring content collections. I'm going to use FR blog. Is going to use the same schema and collection definition as the English blog. I'll save that. Then we just need to come to pages. In Astro, we use this pages directory and the contents of that in combination with our content files to tell Astro where these should be built. So I will make a subdirectory for French, and I'm going to copy blog into it. So we're only going to translate with this method the blog. And actually, we're only going to do the blog post, not the blog index page. So I'll get rid of that. And then in here, I need to query the right collections. So something like FR blog, get that as well. These will fix themselves when we run a build. That should be about it for the Astro side of things. If we run a build now, we can see our build directory and we have fr/blog. If we change one of these in our content directory, we can change it here, translated locally, and I can run a build again. So on this first post, we've just translated it locally. So you can imagine this would, you probably put French here or whatever language you want, and you now have a French version of your page served at the same address, but with the FR prefix in the URL. I won't save that. So we just need to be able to edit that new collection inside of CloudCannon. So I'm just going to copy the posts collection and I'll make a new collection called maybe just FR posts. And I'll change some of these details so I know it's at source, content, FR blog, and I know the URL is the same but has an FR at the start. And the rest of these are just going to be a copy of the other posts collection, so that's good. I just need to make sure we have collection groups. Yep, I need to include this collection in there to make it to make it to the sidebar and therefore be editable. So I'm just going to push all those changes. We're back on CloudCannon. The build is finished and CloudCannon has our latest changes that we made on our local. You can come to posts and FR posts. Screenshots are taking a sec to work, but you can see that the change we made locally is here, and that will also be the same on the live site. So if we go, let's go to the actual article first. I think it was 5 things to improve your email templates. We're on the English version. If we switch to French, we've got translated locally. You have a translated blog post now. Let's do a bit more of a convincing one on CloudCannon, just to drive that home. Cool, so I'll just translate a couple of these paragraphs with Google Translate. Won't be too accurate, but just to show that these are working. Make this a heading too, and okay, so I've just filled some placeholder French out in our WYSIWYG editor here. So if I save that, go to the live site. So once that build has finished, I'll refresh the page that belongs to. You can see it's been translated via that content editor. So there's no kind of file generation from the original version or anything going on here yet. This is just, we've made a direct copy of those original pages, but we've built them at a different address and we'll obviously give them French content instead of English content in this example. You can, of course, use the same approach on a page in the pages collection. Let's go to our local for these. You could also call this French pages and do a similar thing to what you did with French blog. The only thing with these type of pages is they are less likely to share a common layout and more likely to have changes that aren't necessarily text. So what does that mean? When you make a change on your original and there's a button color, say, you'll have to change the text across all your different languages, but then also if you want the button color to stay consistent or any other style related thing, you'll also have to bring those changes over. This is fine if you only have 1 or 2 languages. Once you start getting 10 languages, this might be quite painful to make a change on your original and then propagate those changes throughout each language. So that's where these type of pages may be more suitable to be translated by something we call rosey, and that takes your original, takes some translation information and generates your different languages for you. Meaning that if you change a style on your original to something that's non-text, that will automatically be seen throughout the rest of your languages that you support. So we're going to start by tagging up some of these landing pages for translation by Rosey. We're going to use Rosey just by itself, so no rosey-cloudcannon-connector, which we'll add a bit later in the video once we sort of work out what purpose that actually serves. Let's go to our local code. I won't save that. And we'll follow this getting started guide. So first we need to tag some content. And I'm just going to tag the home hero. So we'll see it nice and easy. Okay, so in our home hero, I've just added a couple of data rosy tags and I've gave them a unique ID. Obviously, if you use this hero in more than one place, this ID won't be unique anymore. So there's a bit of a problem there. But we're just sort of showing how you would add Rosey without the rosey-cloudcannon-connector. The rosey-cloudcannon-connector later on will provide us like a couple of helpful functions which help us generate IDs, help us tag paragraphs that are going to be rendered in here, because at the moment, I mean, this could be multiple paragraphs. So if we put a data rosy tag on the whole thing, it's going to work a bit funny. So we'll just leave that for now. And we'll just sort of see how Rosey works with a couple of basic IDs. And I'll do this locally so we can see what's going on. So first I got to run a build. I know that much. Run a build with this fresh home hero. And then with our built static files in the dist folder, we can run the generate command. This generates a base.json for us, which is a JSON file that contains all the information about our tags on our site. So we'll run this on dist. And you'll see Rosey generate this nice base.json. This is basically to aid us in writing locales.json files, which is what Rosey actually uses for the translation. So you can see we have the base JSON now. So now we need to create some locale files. I'm going to copy and paste this for boilerplate. So Rosey expects it at a locales folder and then whatever language code you're using, .json. And I'll take a ID from here for that. So that key corresponds to this original, which is this. And then we need a translation for try this free. And then I guess we can do another one. Cool, so now that we have this locales file and we have some tagged HTML, we can run the last rosy step, which will take our tagged HTML, see these tags, input the right value for the translation, and should get a multilingual site at the end, which needs to run this command for the rosy generate step. And it's obviously coming out of dist again. So the result of that, it just puts on a translator to the end of that. We can see that we've got our French pages, and if we format. So our French pages, see our translation here, beautiful translations, and our actual French translation, which is this. And then we should still see our blog be translated before we even run Rosy. Just check that they run nicely together, translated locally. So it did, it's all good. So from there, we can just delete that generated thing that Rosie just did. None of that translation will happen actually online yet because we haven't added it to our post build or anything in CloudCannon. And we can do that without the rosey-cloudcannon-connector. Let's just see what that looks like. So actually we can get our commands from here. Generate. I guess there's not a whole lot of point running that yet because nothing happens with our base.json, but we're going to need it later. So let's just add it now. And this one will actually work because we'll have some locales files. This is going to put it in dist translate, which we don't really want. So we need to run a final step where we move the current built directory into a temporary directory called untranslated site. Then we run the build step on it so that we can run it from untranslated site, that temporary directory, into the actual build directory that we want, which is what CloudCannon is expecting, called dist. And then this flag here, we don't want our original content to be served at /en and then the page. So if I run that build command without the default language at root, let's see what happens. So dist translated, yeah, you can see that our English stuff gets put at this /en, and then the actual home page is now a redirecting page. We don't really want that. We just want our original content to be served without the prefix. So we can add this flag, default language at root. You can now see that our index page is instead just our normal English page, English home page. So yeah, back to our post build. This is all happening automatically on each build in CloudCannon. So let's push that up without that dist translated. So as you can see now, there'll be no English homepage yet. Now that we've run a rosy build step on it, once this build finishes in CloudCannon, we should be able to see a French version of the homepage. Yep, you can see our translation there, beautiful translations, and our other one there. You can also see it still works with our blog posts translated locally. That's still working fine. You can see in the Rosy docs that Rosy doesn't really cover the part that creates these locales.json files. So that is where, if you're finding it a bit hard to imagine editors writing these by hand, you can use something called the rosey-cloudcannon-connector. I mean, this could probably work fine for a small amount of translations. You just want to do it once as a developer. But once you start, if you are translating these kind of landing pages, you're going to have a situation where an editor can add a component which might have a data rosy tag in it, and you want the content inside of that to be automatically picked up in that base.json and then move through to the rosey-cloudcannon-connector, which will provide an interface for translators to enter a translation for that content all in app without having to write them by hand. We would also like to be able to generate rosy IDs a bit nicer, be able to tag blocks that contain yet to be rendered HTML elements that come from Markdown. And it would also be nice to translate more common parts of the site, like the header, the footer, and have them in their own dedicated files, how the developer wants it to be structured. So what we can use for that is the rosey-cloudcannon-connector. There are some docs for this. If you go find the repo CloudCannon/RCC, there's some more docs here. And I'm going to follow the getting started docs just for a single site. So we've got a site on CloudCannon. We need to add the sync path next. We can do that in our build config. And we just want to sync the contents of the rosy directory. So we'll update and save. Let's do this next step. We need to install the package. We need to add to our post build, which we've started doing, but we particularly need this stuff. Cool, so we've just surrounded that generate step with some rosey-cloudcannon-connector steps. Come back to that. From here, we can generate a config, which would happen if we, actually, yeah, we can automatically generate one as part of the post build in CloudCannon, and then we pull that down. Or we can run this command locally, fill out some prompts, and then we'll have our config file. I think I'll just opt to push it to CloudCannon and pull it back down. So I'll do this step in the meantime though. So our CloudCannon config and our collections, put it at the bottom. So the path is to Rosie, and we want to be able to see the config file when it comes through, and then also the translations directory when it comes through. And we need to add it to our collection groups so that we can see it in the sidebar in CloudCannon. Cool, so I'll push that up. I'll just sync down any changes on the repo, and then I'll add the rosey-cloudcannon connector. And then since we have the CloudCannon sync paths configured, when something's generated in that rosy folder, aka config file, it will get saved back to our repo after our build. And then we can pull it down locally from the repo. If I refresh the page on CloudCannon after a build, I see these translations. I can see the config file in here, so I could make changes in here if I want, but I could also pull it down because it will be in our repo, and I'll see rcc.yaml. We just want to add a locale to this. We'll just call it fr for the code for now. We'll keep the default markdown key, and we'll keep the default namespace page. But we do want to change this see on page comment. We need our CloudVent URL for that. We won't worry about Git history, so we won't fill in the Git repo. That's all we need to do in here for now. So just wait for the build to do its thing. Sweet. We can also see some stats in here. We have 2 missing translations, no completed ones. We can now see our translations in app. We can see the home page here with some blank things to fill out. And we can see them highlighted on page and context if we need. If we go to one of our blog posts, we can see that this is translated via a content file rather than generating the file via Rosie. But we also have some parts of this page that aren't translated, which would be cool if we could translate the main body content just with the WYSIWYG editor, and then Rosie takes care of the rest of it. So we can do that. If we go to our code again, if I go to navigation.jsx, I've been waiting actually to install the rosey-cloudcannon connector for this because we get a couple of nice helper things which will make this much easier. One of them is generate rosey ID, and then we can just get that from the package at utils. So we can come into our navigation now and add tags to these items, but this time we'll add generate rosey ID item.text. So they'll take the actual text content, slugify it, and use that as the contents of the ID. We'll do the same for these. Whoop. Won't do it for the language picker, and I feel like I missed one. Yes, this one. Cool, so I've added all the tags on this navigation component. One thing that's left to do is how Rosie works at the moment is if it sees a Rosie ID on a page, it will generate a corresponding translation file for that page, which you can then fill in. That's why in CloudCannon at the moment, you can only see the home page because we've only added tags to that page. If we added these tags now without anything else, we'd see every page on the site that has a header or a navigation. So I think every page, and each page would have the header items to fill out, and you need to do that for at least one page, and then it will sync across those values to the duplicate inputs on other pages, but it's not very tidy. So you can nominate certain IDs to live on their own page that doesn't necessarily correspond to a real HTML page. So we can add it to the wrapping element for this whole nav, and we'll just go data rosy namespace equals common. If we go to our config file, you can see that's the default value for namespace pages. We could change this to header and then change that to header, and it would have the same effect, but the page would be called header rather than common. I won't use that, but we'll just use the default of common. And then everything inside of this, the ID will be the slugified text, but it will have this at the start. Cool. So if we push that, while that waits to build, I'm going to go to Home Hero because that had these old IDs. I want to actually use the same function, the generate rosy ID one. Cool. And now that we have these, we have in the rosey-cloudcannon-connector, I can finally target this markdown block. We do that through this thing called data rosy tagger, and that will look at the contents of this div, see the most nested block level elements like p tag, allies, whatever, the most nested one, and then put a tag on that. And then since those inputs need to be marked down, we can add another namespace similar to the common one that we just did, except this time it's concerned with adding that key as markdown. So you can see the namespace page we did earlier, but then markdown keys. So you can define multiple options of inputs, what each markdown input should allow in terms of formatting. And yeah, you could change the name if you didn't like RCC markdown for some reason. So Home Hero is fixed up now. And we can see that our build has finished from the last one on CloudCannon. We can now see this common page. I just realized I forgot to pull and then push. This common page doesn't correspond to any page in particular, so we don't have these see in context links, but we can see everything we want grouped onto one page, and you can see that home not polluted by header entries. Cool, so that last build where we fixed hero up has been finished, and if I refresh that, it should be the exact same result, or exact same appearance in the editor, except that we've added this markdown block, which, if you need a reminder of where it is. So let's fill in something. Pretend this is an actual translation, and we'll also do something to common, another great translation. Cool, so that build's finished, and I go to this home page on the French version. We should see that works, but then, yeah, unsurprisingly, the React component initially works, and then it rehydrates with the content from the data file rather than what Rosie would have put down, which is static HTML. We can fix this though, so if we go back to our local, and this only applies to JavaScript hydrated components. Most of your site will be static HTML, but there will occasionally be things that need to be hydrated via JavaScript, and this is a nice workaround. So if we go to our navigation React component, we basically are getting the navigation data from this JSON file. So it's flashing with a boot, and then it writes over with this text from here. We need a way to bring in the locales data similar to this navigation data. And I guess we need to pick the locales data of the locale that we're on, not just all of the locales data. So I just add a bit of state that holds our locales data for us. We'll also import all of the locales files with this import meta glob syntax. And then in our use effects, so when the page initially loads, which is because it has this empty array, it could just be on page load, we can grab the path from the window, we can grab the locale out of that, put that locale into the path to get the correct data file. Then we just need to use those translations. So if we go to where we were before, instead of just dumping out item.txt, we'll see, do we have locale data? And if there is locale data, do we have something in that which has a key of the slugified item.txt with the namespace of common at the start, and then the value of that. We grab the key, but then we need the value. And if there's no locale data, or if there's no key in the locale data for what we're trying to get, we'll just fall back to the original, which is item.txt, using this nullish coalescing. So just go ahead and do that for the rest of them, and it should fix the problem. So that's all of them done. Sweet, so now that that site is finished building, we can see the translation is preserved. And if we go to a blog post, so we can see Rosie and the split by directory approach working together. We can see that Rosie's taking care of the header translation here, and you could do the same for the rest of these. But we're still using just a normal content file to enter different languages. Well, that about wraps up this video. We have successfully translated pages via file generation using Rosie and the rosey-cloudcannon-connector. Combine that method with just translating via a separate content directory, as we've done with the blog. So, you can expand on these two methods and sort of pick whatever combination works for your use case. If you're following along at home, remember this repo will be linked down below in the description, so feel free to reference that if you need. Next video, we're going to talk about automatic AI translations. Automatically fill out your translations, which a human translator could then come and QA and change in-app. Thanks for watching this far. We would love to hear from you if you do have any questions or feedback. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.